This episode of Uncorking a Story is brought to you by Mike Carlin's novel, The Ruin of Souls. If you like stories that feature puzzles to solve and love a good plot twist, or three, you need to put The Ruin of Souls in your summer reading list right now. Enjoy the show. Well, hello, and welcome to Uncorking a Story, where we share the stories behind the story. That's right, the stories behind the story. We dig in to the backstory behind the authors you know and love, and some you're just discovering for the first time, which I think is great. I'm your host, Mike Carlin, and today I'm very happy to share with you a very personal conversation I had with author Marilyn Peterson Haus about her memoir, Half of a Whole: My Fight for a Separate Life. Now, this book explores the intimate bond between a twin brother and sister, as well as the cruel turn of events that occur when one of them becomes mentally ill, and the courage required to break away from a stifling religious family and a mother who blatantly favored her son. Now, I have a lot of authors pitched to me over the course of a year, and I don't interview everybody who gets pitched to me. It's just the way it goes. I don't have an infinite amount of time, but Marilyn's story stood out to me. And that's because, like her, I'm a twin. And of course, I have to one up her because that's I it's not really part of my personality to one up people, but I was going to be somewhat self-deprecating here and say that I'm going to one up her. I'm the father of triplets. Now, I can't say that I can relate to everything that she's been through, but I can certainly empathize with her on the difficulties that come along with being a twin. And I can see it. I can see these difficulties also kind of manifest themselves as the father of triplets. Um, but if you think about it, or just to shed some light on it for those of you who are not multiples, um, yeah, the difficulties that come with being a twin aren't what you might assume, right? So, for example, my wife always asked me if it ever bothered me that I had to share my birthday with two other people. And yes, you heard that right. My brother and I were born on our mother's 41st birthday. But no, it's like sharing a birthday never bothered me. And I don't think it ever bothered Jim. Certainly didn't bother my mother. We were considered the best gift she could ever have had. And that's why we don't give her gifts at all. I'm just kidding. Um, how egotistical would it be if we just like gave her pictures of us for her birthday? I would never consider doing that. Actually, I guess I would have considered doing that because that thought just came to my head. Um, but no, we never had a problem sharing birthdays. And as a matter of fact, we actually enjoyed it because it meant a party. And for good measure, we'd throw in my father's birthday, and as he was okay, so we're August 30th, he's August 17th, and then we'd throw in my older brother's birthday, who's September 5th, and we'd have all these four birthdays celebrating on the same day. And it was just a greater cause for celebration. It was a bigger party. There were more people, and we actually loved it. So no, sharing birthdays wasn't a problem. What bothered me the most, and I think my brother would echo this, and I know my kids would echo this, is being referred to as one unit. We were always referred to as the twins. Now I'm 46 years old, about to turn 47 in a month or so, a little bit over a month, and it still happens, right? It still happens. We're still considered the twins. My sister, love her dearly, uh, she is not part of the birthday celebration because she had the gall to be born in July. But she still refers to us as the twins. One of the twins coming over, the twins coming over, blah blah blah. And she says it about my kids too. Oh, what are the trips up to? And I don't begrudge her for it. But that's an issue. Being having that lack of individuality is an issue, and also up there in terms of kind of difficulties, right, that come with being born as part of a multiple unit is the constant comparing to each other. Oh, that was the worst. My mother would be like, Michael, you need to get your English grade up because Jimmy is doing so much better than you in English. Or like on the flip side, I dated a lot and my brother didn't. And my mother would say things like, Michael, I just don't understand. She absolutely does not sound like that, but this is mom voice for you right now. Michael, I don't understand why you're always going out on dates with girls and your brother just doesn't. And one night, because she would say this all the time, one night at the dinner table, it's me, my mom, and Chris. Dad was on a business trip. My older siblings were gone. My brother Jimmy was probably taking a nap because this is what he would do around dinner time. So Chris was over. My mother says this, why does Jimmy not date girls? And I looked at her just dead in the eyes, stared at her. I said, Mom, Jimmy doesn't date girls because he's gay. And I was able to deliver that with such a straight face. My friend Chris collapses on the floor. The blood drains from my mother's face, thinking that I'm serious. And just to be clear, Jimmy's not gay. And there would be nothing wrong with it if he were. Absolutely nothing wrong with it. It was just a moment in time I decided to, push the boundaries and see what she would do. But that memory of that joke, as crass and look, 35 years later, uh, probably tasteless, right? But it highlights something, and it highlights the fact that, to further differentiate myself from my brother, I developed this wicked sense of humor. It helped me. Jimmy was very stoic. I mean, that definitely a word you would use to describe my brother Jim. Very stoic. And I, on the other hand, had to, felt perhaps, and this is all kind of after therapy for me, you know, one aspect of my personality, funny, dialed it up, and really set me apart from my brother. And I think I was in need of differentiation because we were always referred to as a unit. And I see my kids doing the same thing. That my kids did the same thing. So I have two girls and a boy, and the two girls night and day from each other, night and day. My daughter Maggie, tomboy. My daughter Grace, girly girl. And Gracie loved Taylor Swift. Maggie had to hate Taylor Swift. Same thing with silly boy bands, right? If Gracie heard Harry Styles, she'd go crazy. Maggie would just shake her head. And the thing is, I was talking to my daughter Maggie one day as we were driving in the car. They're 19 now, and she was humming along to a Taylor Swift song, and I called her out on it. I'm like, I didn't know you knew the words to "Love Story." She's like, yeah, when we were younger, I used to make fun of Grace for listening to Taylor Swift, but I actually like Taylor Swift. And I kind of, gave it to her a little bit. And she's like, yeah, I felt like I needed to differentiate myself. And that's the truth. You feel that pressure. You feel that pressure. But here's the thing. This isn't my story. You didn't come to tune into this to hear about me or my kids. Or maybe you did. I don't know. But I'd like to think you're here because you're really interested in what Marilyn Peter Haus has to say. Now, this is a story that features sexism, favoritism, a strict religious upbringing, also has mental illness in there. Yet she winds up weaving in these themes of forgiveness and reconciliation throughout. And I think that's what really kind of hits home for me. While all this negative stuff was there, and I would even characterize it as traumatic because she was in such and you'll hear her talk about it. I mean, she was in such a rush to leave this part of her life behind, leave this strict upbringing behind. Yet there was also this element of forgiveness and reconciliation in there, which I think is beautiful and really what ties her memoir together. So, just as a reminder here, her memoir, Half of a Whole My Fight for a Separate Life, will be available for sale starting June 8th. And since you can pick it up wherever books are sold, I'm going to urge you to consider showing some love and support to your local independently owned bookstore because small businesses, let's face it, need your help more than ever these days. Though if you must buy it online, and I know some people might have to because they don't have access to a local independently owned bookstore, please consider shopping at bookshop.org as they always donate a percentage of sales to support independent bookstores. So without further ado, here is my interview with author Marilyn Peter Haus.
I grew up on a farm out on the western side of Minnesota, which is considered part of the plains, and grew up on a farm about 7 miles from a town of 700 people. So my twin and I spent all our time together when we were young playing. And then we went to a one-room school for 6 years, 20 students in 6 grades. It was 8 grades when we started, then 6 grades. And then traveled on a bus to the nearest towns 7 miles away for high school. And by then, I was beginning to feel the isolation of living so far away from it. It seemed to me the world was going on somewhere, and I was missing it. And by then, my twin and I had started chafing against each other a bit in adolescence. So I couldn't wait to escape. And so I escaped to where everybody escaped to, which was Minneapolis. And so I went to Augsburg College, now Augsburg University there, and got my Bachelor of Arts degree. And then married and moved to the East Coast with my husband. And we raised 3 children. And when the youngest one got on the bus to go to kindergarten, I went back to school and got an MBA. And then I launched myself into a career and traveled internationally and worked in that career until I retired at age 67. And that's when I had the chance to write my book, the book that had been burning in my heart that I really wanted to write. So that's kind of the history. Takes you up to the point where I picked up my pen.
And what was that process like for you when you started? How would you characterize that?
Well, I had this burning story that I wanted to tell, but I didn't know really how to do creative writing or writing. So I started working on the craft, and I took a workshop that met weekly to learn how to write. I studied books on craft. I had journals that I read. And as I was learning the craft, I was writing what I call cute little stories about living on the farm. But my co-writers said, every story you write is about your twin, has your twin in it. Why don't you write that story? And that was the story I really wanted to write. And so when I started that story, it's like uncorking a story. The story just came out, and I wrote. It took me I started in my early 70s. So it took me, I think, 7 years to finish the writing process. It was a very interesting process because I had to dig down deeper and deeper into the layers as I was writing. So it was a process that helped me to come to understand much more the things that I was writing about. And I came to understand the people I was writing about, the motivations, what caused us to do the things we did. And so the process was, and I found also that the process threw me right back into the time that I was writing about. So I went through those deep emotions all over again, which in a way was good because then I could kind of capture them on the page. So it was an exhausting but a liberating process as well.
Well, it sounds like a therapeutic process to kind of go back and revisit a period of time in your life, which it sounds like there was some struggle there. And just to be, clear, not clear here, but just to let you know, I actually, we have something in common in that I have a twin brother. We're fraternal twins. We're not identical. And I'm actually the father of triplets. So there's a lot of multiples going on on in this conversation. But tell me, I mean, why do you suppose all of these stories that you were trying to write, had to do with your twin? Why do you think that was?
Twins, I'm obviously also a fraternal twin, but twins, there was a shocking story that my mother told me or wrote in our baby books that I didn't discover till much later in life, that she had kept me in my walker for 3 months after I had walked across a room so that I wouldn't walk before my twin brother. And that was the start of a lifetime attempt on her part to champion my twin, who was the firstborn son. He was to be the leader of the family. He was to take on responsibility for the family. He was to take over the farm. And so anything I did that she interpreted as being successful, she felt diminished my twin. So she took upon herself kind of her mission in life to make my twin into the son my father wanted. So that was very problematic, obviously, in my relationship with her. And the thing about twins is when they are supposed to individuate, separate, define themselves as separate people, sometimes they take their twin into their own self-boundary. And that's really what I had done. So my twin was, in a way, an extension of myself. And so when I was writing about my twin, it took into account all these different aspects of what a twin, of a relationship with a twin was like. And so it was a very powerful theme for me to kind of work my way through all of that. And of course, his mental illness made everything very, very complicated and difficult.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, there's, we have to, and I want to remind my listeners who may not know the story as well, which of course is documented in your forthcoming book. I believe it comes out tomorrow.
Yes.
There's a couple of things that I think are going on. You've got obviously dynamics between boys and girls, but there's also, I mean, there's a time period here that you guys were born when in the 1940s, was it, or
1941?
Okay. And so there's a time in culture that, for many of us is quite different than it is right now. So can you paint a little bit more of a picture of really what life was like on that farm back in 1941 and during the early parts of your childhood? And that would be great.
Yes. Yes. In the early parts of my childhood, it was a wonderful place to grow up. My twin and I spent our time. We had very little supervision because, of course, farm wives have enormous amounts of work to do, as do farmers. And so my twin and I had lots of time to ourselves. We explored the farm. We played. We discovered new litters of kittens. We fed corn to the pigs. We explored the stream nearby that led to a lake. So that was a wonderful time. And then we went, as I mentioned, to the one-room country school, which was also a very sheltered environment. It was neighbors within a 9-square-mile radius that went to this school. So it was like our brothers and sisters were in the same room we were, and we knew all the people. So that was very sheltered. It was only when I became an adolescent that I began to feel the isolation. And getting on the bus to go to the town school sounds like a small deal, but for us, it was a major transition because we then ran into kids who weren't raised on a farm and had, they seemed to know everything, to be very sophisticated, things that we farm kids just didn't know. So it wasn't until we were adolescents that I began to feel isolated. And also we were raised in a fundamentalist evangelical family. So we weren't allowed to dance. We weren't allowed to go to movies. We weren't allowed to play cards. And of course, that's what teenagers want to do. So I felt isolated from our friends as well. And that was when I really started to want to, what I call escape, thinking that, the world out there was going on and I was missing it.
Gotcha. Okay. So thank you for that. But as you're talking, are you familiar with the movie Footloose at all?
Not really. No.
There was a movie in I guess it was the 1980s now, starring Kevin Bacon and John Lithgow, and he's sort of this outsider who moves to this very religious fundamentalist town, and he's all about dancing, and he wants to bring dancing to the town, and the elders, if you were not his biggest fan, let's say. But enough about 1980s pop culture. When when you moved east, it sounds like you had quite an adventure. So you moved out here, and you had quite the career. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yes, I did get my MBA, and then I launched myself into a career. I worked for one company for about 12 years, and then I moved to another company, both locally. And I worked for a Crane and Company that makes all the currency paper for the United States currency. And I worked for them for about another 12 or 15 years. And that involved traveling internationally, meeting with producers of banknote paper, of the security features, the many security features that are in the paper. And so I traveled to, a number of places. Sometimes I'd be gone for several weeks at a time. And that was a challenge, but I enjoyed it. I think in many ways, I was trying to prove to my father, which is kind of an interesting way to put it, that I could be successful in a man's world. Because when I was growing up, my father, he looked at me one time straight in my face and said, "Women can't handle numbers." And I excelled at math. I mean, I had brought home straight A's in math all the way through high school. And he said to me, "Women can't handle numbers." And I said, "Well, Dad, how can you say that when I am good at math?" And it was like he just wouldn't respond. It did not fit into with his perception of the way things should be, that in his mind, women were not good at math. And so I thought, well, am I not a woman? What is going on here? It was very interesting. So to finish that up,
Geez. So
I think that part of me wanted to be successful in a man's world in a way to show my father, who is no longer alive, that I could succeed in a world where numbers were very important.
So was there ever a reconciliation there, or did he ever admit to it? I mean, were you ever able to convince him that, hey, look what I've done, and look at, this is my success? And
Well, he died before I finished my MBA, so I never had a chance to have that particular conversation with him. But my father and I were actually very close. I think I defied him, I argued with him, I debated with him, and I think, we both actually, that was how we connected. And so I think he did have a great deal of respect for me. And sometimes I'd hear him use my arguments when he was in other discussions, and vice versa. I'd sometimes use his arguments. So my father and I think were really very close. It was just that I don't think I made very many dents in his bias against what women's capabilities were.
Sure. And what about your mom? I know, I mean, early days, you mentioned her keeping you in a walker so you wouldn't walk before your brother. How would you characterize your relationship with your mother throughout your life?
Well, my relationship, I loved my mother. I adored my mother. And, she worked so hard to take care of the family and feed the family. And, but her criticism of me, the real heartbreaking event for me was when I had just finished college, and I went on a trip with a friend, and she thought I had stepped away from her religious upbringing, that the upbringing she had wanted us to have. And so she returned a letter I had written to her, a letter of love. She mailed it back to me with a note saying, "You are not the daughter I thought you were." It broke my heart. It really broke my heart. And in dealing with it, I was working in Minneapolis at the time. I built an insulated wall around myself because the letter she returned, I ended up shredding it and burning it. And I built an insulated wall around myself to protect myself from her. And when I went into therapy after my brother's breakdown, my therapist said something I've never forgotten when I told him that story. He said, "She lost a daughter, but you lost a mother." And I think that was the most painful event with my mother. And then she continued to criticize me, to demean my career. I'm laughing because one time I called her, she called me at work, and I was preparing to go on a 2-week trip to Japan. And so I was telling her about it, and her question was, well, who's going to cook for George? And George is my husband. That was her only question. Who's going to cook for George? She could not imagine that a woman should be traveling for business when she was supposed to be home with her husband. So my mother was very critical of me and critical of my successes. And it was only 15 years after I finished therapy that I was able to surface that rage I had buried. And I was able to confront my mother. And I shouted, I remember I had never stood up to her directly. And I can remember shouting at her. It was over the telephone, saying, it's not my fault. I didn't do it. And it was about a specific incident, but it was really about making me feel responsible for my twin and his issues. And at that point, I did confront her, and she, for a brief, small moment, was able to admit she hadn't been fair to me. But by that point, I had, once I kind of opened up that volcano of feelings, I was able to work my way through it. And I ended up, my mother slid into dementia and spent the last 6 years in a nursing home. But I felt very warm and protective of her at that point. So it's a story, I think, of acceptance and forgiveness and actually working my way through all those issues.
So, I mean, we talked a little bit about your mother and father. I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about your brother. Just talk to me a little bit about your relationship with him and how it sort of changed and evolved over the years.
Well, when we started out, when we were young, of course, we were full-time, all-day playmates. And he was my life and I was his life, and we were extremely close. And then as he reached adolescence, he became my mother almost had to drag him out of bed to get him off to catch the bus for school. And he became very antagonistic to my father, and his relationship became very difficult. And he and I began to chafe against each other. And so part of the reason I wanted to escape was to escape from him and his troubles. Not him, but him and his troubles. And so then after I graduated from college, my mother made him go to Augsburg College as well as me. And he dropped out after a year and a half. And then he went home and worked on the farm for a while. And then he went into the military. And when he came home from the military, he visited us. By then I was married. And that was when I began to wonder if something wasn't quite right with him. He had this rage that he had never shown before. He had always been a calm, quiet person. And so in the 20s was when I began to wonder about his mental health. But I was busy raising 3 small children living on the East Coast. And then when we went back to my mother's place for a holiday, and he had his psychotic breakdown, and I had to call the police and have them come and really drag him out of the place and get him into the hospital. And that was when he pulled me back into his life. That was a very dramatic way of pulling me back in his life. And his breakdown, as I mentioned, was triggered a breakdown in me, a quiet breakdown, where I went into therapy for 3.5 years. I had a huge ocean of loss over my brother. We had that intense bonding, and it had been shattered in some kind of a way. And I had no idea of how much grief I had stashed away, I had pushed aside. And so opening that up and working my way through it was life-saving for me, really. And But every time, so my brother had a series of manic breakdowns over the years. And each time he had a manic episode, he would accuse me of destroying his life. He would say, I had him labeled. And so things that he did that would normally be considered normal would cause him to be hospitalized. And he would claim that it was my fault because, the fact that I had called the police and he had been labeled. But what I found was when the manic episodes were over and he went back on his medications, the bonds we had developed as early in our lives were still there, still intact. And so I knew that no matter how much he raged at me, that the love was still there. And so I would go and visit him when he was in the psychiatric ward. I would go and visit him. He pulled himself away from the family for many years. I would go and when we flew into Minneapolis, I'd say, would you meet us at some place where a restaurant? We'd have lunch together. And he always would. And we'd have a very nice time. So I found ways to connect with him even during his episodes. I found ways to connect with him. And only in the last years of his life did I actually decided that I wanted to ask him about his memory of our experiences on the farm. So we actually talked about some of the things he remembered growing up. And he, interestingly to me, said he knew Mother favored him. He knew that. And so many of the things I'd been struggling with, he was completely aware of.
Wow. How, by him admitting that, how did that impact your relationship with him?
It just opened up a whole lot of my feelings for him that he had shared that what hadn't been good for me hadn't been good for him either, and that we really shared a mutual understanding of what had happened with our parents. My mother had favored him and my dad had favored me, and it had not been good for anybody. So I felt very warm towards him at that point, that we could actually talk openly and honestly about it. Now, I'm talking about my twin, Scandinavian, a few words. So a short letter is what I'm talking about. But that short letter contained so much for me.
Yeah. Now you mentioned, you alluded to the fact that your twin has passed away. When did he die?
He died when he was 67. So the year I retired was the same year he died.
Okay. And how did you react
to his?
That was
in 2009. Yeah. In 2009.
Okay.
I was able to, by that point, he was ridden with cancer, and he was still working at a part-time job. And his daughter, his wonderful daughter, whom I didn't even know at that time because he'd kind of kept her from us, we couldn't find him. We didn't know where he'd gone. He didn't answer his telephone. And finally, through his manager at work, we found that he had checked himself into the hospital. And so my husband and I flew to Minneapolis to see him in the hospital. So I spent the last 4 or 5 days with him in the hospital and sat at his bedside and stayed with him as he, and was with him when he died. And we had a very close connection, which I talk about in the book at the final end.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like you had a little bit of closure there.
Yes, definitely.
When he passed away, closure. You were able to be with him, and yeah. Did your children get to know him at all? I'm curious.
Yes, they did. And when they were there, when he had a psychotic episode, it was terrifying. I don't capture a whole lot of that in the book because it's like you don't need to tell the whole story. But he was he was having hallucinations, and he was becoming very loud and overbearing and overpowering, and the children were frightened. And when I had to finally call the police, one of our children took his daughter down into a separate room to protect her, and two of our children went to watch for the police when they came. So, they were helping out to get us through. It was chaos. It was utter chaos trying to get him out and into the hospital. So yes, they were very frightened, but they also saw him when he was calm. Not as much as I would have liked, because by the time that this happened, he had so many periods where he was manic, and then we wouldn't see him. So they didn't get to know him really well. But they were worried that I was also going to have bipolar disorder. So
yeah.
I wish that they could have seen the softer side of my brother, the brother that wasn't affected by his mental illness. I wish they could have known that part of him, but there wasn't much opportunity for that.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. But I mean, that side of him can live on through your memory of him, and perhaps your storytelling to your children and grandchildren about their uncle and great uncle.
Yes, and the wonderful thing is my brother, of course, he was married and had a daughter. And since at the time of his death, that's when I really got to know her. She's a wonderful young woman. She's smart. She's funny. She's resilient. And she's just a wonderful legacy of my brother. And I feel very close to her now. And our children, of course, she's their cousin, and they love her. They think she's great. So that's a wonderful a legacy of my brother for all of us.
Well, the book comes out tomorrow. Where will it be available for people to buy, Marilyn?
Well, you should be able to get it at any local bookstore. You can buy it on Amazon. I guess you can go to Post Hill Press, who published it, and they would be able to tell you how to get it. I think any of the normal ways you would buy a book. So, and I hope that lots of readers will buy it and read it.
I do too. It sounds like a wonderful story, a deep story, and certainly a very personal story. So I congratulate you on the launch of it tomorrow. I know it's a big day, an exciting day. And do you have a launch party planned or any other launch events?
Yes, actually, my writing teacher is having a party for me on Wednesday, day after tomorrow, and 50 of my women writing friends and friends in general are coming to the party. And so that's a launching party. And then I have another friend who's giving me a party. And then in Minnesota, my sister is having a party at the Kirkhoven Civic Center, which is in the town of 700, a book signing there. So those three parties are already on the way. So that will be fun.
Well, I have to say, I need to write another book so I can have some parties. Now that I can see other human beings again, it's it would be good to get back out in the world. So it must feel great to have all this excitement around the launch of this book.
Yes, and it works out perfectly because we can, with the pandemic restrictions just being loosened, we can actually see each other physically, and we can, we can do it without masks. I think everyone I know has been vaccinated.
Well, that's a good thing.
So that's a great pleasure to be able to, after this long duration, to do it all in person.
Yeah, well, it sounds great. I encourage all of my listeners to go out and buy this book. And actually, why don't you give a plug for it, Marilyn? Why don't you give out the full title and we can end on that one.
Yes, the book is called Half of a Whole, My Fight for a Separate Life. And it's really about, as I've talked about, the close attachment of twins. It's about the devastating impact of mental illness on my twin, on me, and on our relationship. And it's about how difficult it is to break away from the people you love in order to live your own life, to live life on your own terms. And I hope that people who are interested in mental illness, most families know someone or have someone who has mental illness, will find the story to have interest for them. And people who are in difficult relationships with their mother, sadly, that's many people as well, that they will also be interested in that. And all those people who want to know what it was like growing up on a farm in Minnesota when you were a kid, they should find it interesting too. So I would hope that many people would find many reasons to be interested in this book. And it takes you through some hard times, but there are joyous times as well. So I think that's about what I have to say.
There we go. Well, thank you very much for talking to me, Marilyn. I enjoyed this conversation.
And thank you, Mike, for having me. It was a pleasure.
Well, there you have it. My interview with Marilyn Peterson Haus. Wow, what a conversation. Just a very inspiring story. She's certainly been through a lot. I love the theme of kind of breaking away and kind of, making a separate life for herself, but also, kind of coming back, reconciling with her mother, the relationship she had with her father, and of course, kind of coming back with her brother. And she kind of, having those kind of tough conversations that we have in families from time to time. But I do think it's a great story. In a way, it's kind of a love story for herself, because she was able to really take something very negative and bring it into some positive territory. So as a reminder, her book will be out tomorrow. Her book, of course, a memoir called Half of a Whole, My Fight for a Separate Life. It is available tomorrow. I say tomorrow. You may not be listening to this on June 7th. You might be listening to this on June 9th, in which case the book's already out. The book will be out June 8th. How about that? We'll be very clear. The book will be out June 8th. You can pick it up wherever books are sold. Of course, we'd encourage you to purchase it from a independently owned bookstore. Show the mom and pops of the world some love after this time of hardship, if you will. That's probably an understatement, right? So be sure to pick up the book. And if you must buy it online, of course, there's bookshop.org, where all proceeds from all sales go to support local independently owned bookstores. Honestly, I have no idea how they do that, but they do, and I think it's a good thing. If you want to learn more about me, author and podcaster extraordinaire Mike Carlin, please visit MikeCarlin.com. That's Carlin with an O and not an I. There you'll be able to listen to some past episodes of Uncorking a Story, as well as check out some of my writing. As I mentioned at the top of this episode, my latest novel, The Ruin of Souls, is available for sale right now. So you go and buy that wherever books are sold. And for all the hardworking people here at Uncorking a Story, you can do us all a favor by doing the following. Number one, go to wherever you get your podcast and rate us. Maybe give us a review. That will always put a little wind in our sails, as well as subscribe. Hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all the forthcoming episodes of Uncorking a Story, as well as listen to some old ones as well. So that's it for all the aforementioned hardworking men, women, and dogs here at Uncorking a Story, because we do have a few of those. Sometimes you might hear them in the background. This is Mike Carlin saying thanks for listening, and until next time. We're just going to let the blues play out a little bit here. Enjoy the blues. It's not me playing, though I wish I could play this good.